Ever feel like you're just constantly playing catch up? Even when you're like, sure, you started on time.
Mm.
Or maybe, a simple question feels like it's loaded with criticism, leaves you feeling kind of deflated unexpectedly.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And those tasks that just seem to multiply no matter how hard you try to get ahead.
Absolutely. If any of that rings a bell for you listening, well, you're in the right place.
Today on the deep dive, we're really going deep into the neurology behind ADHD, trying to shed some light on why these everyday things can feel so significant.
Exactly. And we've pulled together a really interesting mix of sources for this. We've got articles from places like ADHD and Omaha, which are great resources.
Right?
There's also a detailed abstract from PubMed,
Mm.
a really fascinating discussion thread over on Reddit.
Oh, yeah, the Reddit ones are always illuminating.
They really are.
Yeah.
And underpinning a lot of this is a pretty comprehensive research article looking specifically at white matter in the brain. So our goal today, really, is to pull out the most important bits from all these sources to help you understand the neurological stuff linked to ADHD and how it can show up in so many different ways in daily life.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe with something that seemed to pop up a few times, this idea of like a negative mindset developing.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. It seems like for some people it becomes almost a learned response, like bracing yourself because you expect things won't go well.
Right.
And what's really interesting is how this can become its own hurdle. If someone with ADHD has this history, you know, feeling like they're falling short or always getting criticized, that anticipation of a negative outcome can get so strong that it actually makes them less likely to even begin a task.
Avoidance, basically.
Exactly. The ADHD article touched on that thought process of, well, nothing's getting better anyway, so why bother trying?
Yeah.
It becomes a kind of protective shield, but one that stops you moving forward.
And it's not always about huge dramatic failures, is it? I thought that example in the article was so telling, the one about someone asking, is the garbage ready?
Oh, yeah.
And it's instantly heard as like a criticism, a telling off.
Right. That simple quotient, it just perfectly highlights that heightened emotional sensitivity that can be there.
It really does.
And if you zoom out, that same ADHD piece mentions something pretty staggering, that kids with ADHD might hear something like 20,000 more criticisms by 6th grade compared to their peers.
Oh, 20,000. That's a lot.
It's huge. The author even shared her own husband's story, being called slacker growing up.
Yeah.
And just the lasting weight of those kinds of labels, that constant negative feedback.
It really reframes those small everyday interactions, doesn't it? It's like those thousands of little negative nudges build up and create this filter,
The lens
a lens through which people with ADHD might see interactions, even perfectly neutral ones. The emotional reaction just sort of flares up and overrides the logic of the situation.
Absolutely. And this emotional reactivity, it can then sort of bleed into other challenges,
Yeah.
like how time itself is experienced.
Time perception. Yes.
The ADHD article had a really helpful way of putting it, the faster car metaphor.
Right. I remember that. The idea that if you've got a choice, say, between something fun right now versus doing what you need to do to be on time,
Yeah.
the pull of that present moment, that immediate thing, is just incredibly powerful. It's not like you forget being late is bad.
No, not at all.
It's more like that future consequence just doesn't feel as real or as urgent as the thing right in front of you.
Precisely. The article explained how that urge, maybe to play just one more round of a game or reply to one more message right now, it can completely overshadow the memory of, oh yeah, last time I did this, I was late and it was stressful, or the thought of the future stress. It's like the past and future just lose their grip compared to the now.
Which connects to that idea of now and not now that came up a lot on Reddit too, right? Where later just doesn't really register effectively.
Exactly. That came up again and again.
Yeah.
This binary sense of time. It's either happening right now or it's in this vague not now category that's hard to grasp or plan for. And that definitely feeds into problems starting tasks and managing time.
Okay, so we're seeing these links between emotions, time perception, but what's actually happening like physically in the brain that might be contributing to all this?
All right, let's get into the neurobiology a bit. Our Omaha source gave a good overview. Basically, our brains work through these really complex networks, these neural circuits.
The wiring.
The wiring, exactly. And they communicate using chemical messengers, neurotransmitters. Omaha described them really nicely as like unique keys.
Keys.
Yeah, keys that fit specific locks to open up particular pathways or activate certain functions in the brain.
Okay, so sticking with that analogy, which are the important keys when we talk about ADHD?
Well, according to the PubMed abstract we looked at, two big ones are dopamine and noradrenaline.
Okay, heard of those.
Yeah, they're pretty well known. Now, our sources didn't dive super deep into the complex chemistry, but the key thing to know is that these chemicals are crucial for things like attention, motivation, reward,
Hmm.
and also those higher level skills we call executive functions. Things like planning, organizing, starting tasks, controlling impulses.
Right, that makes sense. If those chemical messengers aren't working quite optimally, you can see how that would impact all those critical processes.
Definitely.
Now, switching gears a bit, that Reddit discussion you mentioned, it was just packed with these amazing analogies people use to describe their own experience, just tons of them. Where do we even start?
I know, right? It was incredible. But what's so valuable about those analogies from the Reddit community is how they offer this glimpse into an internal world that can be really hard to put into words otherwise.
Yeah.
They give us such a rich, diverse picture, like the one comparing the brain to a 5-year-old toddler who decides what I get or don't get to do.
Huh. Yeah, that really captures that feeling of internal struggle, doesn't it? Like, you know what you need to do, but some other part is just not cooperating.
Exactly. Or the comparison to Hal fixing a light bulb from Malcolm in the Middle.
Oh, I love that show. Yeah, I can picture that perfectly, the sort of chaotic, zigzagging thought process, plus the working memory issues making you forget what you started doing.
Precisely. And so many people chimed in about the but first thing,
Oh, yeah. I need to do X, but first I'll just quickly do Y.
and then Z, and then ABC, and suddenly X is half finished or not started at all, amidst a pile of other half finished things.
Totally. And the mind as a haunted radio, that paints such a vivid picture of that constant internal static or noise that's hard to tune out.
It really does. Then there were all the descriptions trying to capture time blindness, like constantly feeling like you just arrived somewhere but don't remember the drive.
Yeah, that feeling of time just slipping away unnoticed, or just that stark now versus not now divide we talked about, echoing the Attitude article. It really hits home how tough future planning can be.
It does, and the analogy of channel surfing but someone else has the remote,
Yeah.
that's such a good way to describe that feeling of your focus being pulled all over the place without you really directing it.
Yeah, like you're not in control of your own attention span.
Right. And some people made a really poignant comparison between unmedicated inattentive ADHD and how depression feels, which really underlines the emotional weight it can carry.
That's heavy. There were also ones about sensory overload, weren't there? Like the broken filter.
Yes, the broken filter actively processing all sensory input, or threading a needle with a strobe light. Those really illustrate how overwhelming just, existing in the world can sometimes feel when you can't filter out stimuli.
Wow. And starting a race a few meters back, that one really stuck with me, this sense of always having to put in extra effort just to be on the same starting line.
It's striking, isn't it? Just the sheer variety of images people use. A cluttered studio apartment for a mind.
Right.
The frustration of having no bookmark for your focus, so every interruption means starting over from scratch.
Ugh, yeah. That's a killer for productivity.
Absolutely. Even the ones that sound a bit funny, like needing to pee your pants on purpose to finally get yourself to do something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, actually speaks volumes about how counterintuitive motivation can sometimes feel, like needing that extreme pressure to overcome inertia.
Okay. I'm trying to keep up. There were so many more. Bees in the brain.
Bees in the brain, yeah. Thoughts like a fireworks finale or a pinball machine just constantly bouncing around.
An internal fire alarm going off, but you're not sure why.
Exactly. Or that feeling of a wall, like a physical barrier between your intention to do something and actually doing it.
Man. And the vehicle analogies. Ferrari engine. Bicycle brakes.
That's a classic.
Yes.
Or steering wheel and accelerator problems. Or maybe less flatteringly, a crazy psychotic monkey driving the car.
Huh. Or a strong, untamed horse, lots of power, but hard to direct.
Yeah, that captures the energy but lack of control. Trying to focus on one blade of a fast-moving ceiling fan.
Ooh, that's a good one for hyperfocus versus distractibility.
Limited inventory space, like in a video game. A junk drawer on a trampoline with a puppy jumping on it.
Okay, that's impressively specific and chaotic.
A Chromebook with way too many tabs open, all playing music. Running in quicksand. Carrying sand as sack, but it's full of rocks.
It really conveys that sense of slogging, of extra weight and effort, a train on dysfunctional tracks, walking through a blizzard hearing simlish, like gibberish, right?
Yeah, sensory overload and difficulty processing. And distinguishing the level of difficulty, the sprained ankle versus missing a foot analogy.
Right, differentiating between everyone has bad days and a chronic diagnosable condition.
Exactly. A never-ending podcast playlist that skips randomly. Executive dysfunction as a car that's just run out of gas. Everything feeling like it's permanently set to hard mode.
That feeling of being exhausted and overwhelmed, like being awake for 3 days straight while everyone's mad at you.
Oof, yeah. Or the credit scene from Inside Out, with all the cats just batting at the controls randomly.
Yes, a golden retriever brain enthusiastic, but thoughts just don't stick.
A computer with 200 tabs open again. The very direct erectile dysfunction of the brain one.
Whoa, okay. Powerful metaphor for inability to perform on demand.
An invisible backpack just weighing you down. Imagining a task someone dislikes, then multiplying that feeling by 1,000, but for every task.
That really hits at the motivation deficit.
That restless feeling, like scrolling Netflix for hours, unable to just pick something, being tied to a chair with 1,000 TVs blasting at full volume, and you can't find the remote.
Sensory hell, basically.
The absent-minded professor's stereotype knows a lot but can't access it easily. And the crucial point you mentioned, it's often about the frequency and severity of common issues.
Right. It's not that neurotypical people never forget things or get distracted. It's the degree.
Precisely. Which is why hearing, oh, everyone does that sometimes, can feel so dismissive.
And the lack of that satisfaction, that positive feeling after finishing something, just emptiness or on to the next fire.
An itchy brain feeling. Herding 30 toddlers in a busy mall. Trying to direct water by punching a hole in a swimming pool, a futile effort.
Yeah. That inability to tame that strong horse, living constantly on a disorienting teacup ride.
It's just an incredible collection. It really drives home the sheer range and intensity of the internal experience. They give us so much more insight than a clinical description sometimes can.
Absolutely. It's like a crowdsourced phenomenology of ADHD. So valuable.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly now to the more structural side of things. The PubMed central source looked at white matter, right?
That's right. It was a deep dive into research on white matter alterations in ADHD.
So first off, maybe just briefly, what is white matter? Why is it important?
Sure. So white matter is basically the brain tissue that's made up mostly of nerve fibers, the axons.
Yeah.
And they're coated in myelin.
The fatty sheath.
Exactly, that fatty insulation. Think of it like the coating on electrical wires. It helps signals travel much faster and more efficiently between different parts of the brain. It's like the brain's internal communication network. It's high-speed internet cables.
Got it. And these studies use something called DWI.
Diffusion-weighted imaging, yeah. It's a type of MRI scan that lets researchers look at the microstructure of that white matter, how organized the pathways are.
Okay. And this big review, looking at, 129 studies, that's a huge amount of data. What did they find consistently?
It is a lot of research, yeah. And a really consistent finding across many, though not all, of those studies was reduced fractional anisotropy, or FA, in several key brain regions in people with ADHD compared to controls.
Fractional anisotropy. Okay, what does that mean in simple terms?
So FA is basically a measure of how directional and organized the water movement is within the white matter. Think of water flowing more easily along a well-paved straight highway compared to a bumpy, winding road. Higher FA means the water molecules are moving more uniformly along the nerve fibers, suggesting those pathways are highly organized and maybe more efficient. Reduced FA, then, suggests that the pathways might be less organized, maybe the fibers are less densely packed, or the myelin insulation is different, or perhaps the fibers are crossing over each other more complexly.
Less like a highway, more like city streets.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. Maybe less direct or efficient flow of information.
Were there specific parts of the brain where this reduced FA kept showing up?
Yes, definitely. One major area was the corpus callosum.
Ah, the big connector between the two halves of the brain.
Exactly. It's the largest white matter structure, crucial for integrating information and coordinating between the left and right hemispheres. The studies often found reduced FA there, especially in parts called the splenium and the genu.
Okay, anywhere else?
Yeah, quite a few other areas were implicated frequently. Places like the sagittal stratum, which is involved in visual and auditory pathways. The internal and external capsules, major relay stations for information going to and from the cortex.
Right. The corona radiata, which connects the cortex down to deeper structures. And also, several of these long association fiber tracks the superior longitudinal fasciculus.
Involved in language and attention.
Right. The inferior longitudinal fasciculus, important for visual recognition, and the inferior fronto-occipital fasciculus, connecting frontal and back regions, involved in lots of cognitive functions.
So these are all really critical communication routes in the brain.
Yeah.
If they're showing these differences, this reduced FA, what might that mean for someone's day-to-day experience of ADHD?
Well, it suggests that the efficiency or maybe the organization of communication along these pathways might be different. For example, differences in the corpus callosum could potentially contribute to some of the executive function difficulties we see in ADHD because many complex tasks require really smooth, rapid communication between both sides of the brain, things like shifting attention, planning, inhibiting impulses.
Makes sense.
But it's important to add, the picture isn't perfectly simple. Some studies in the review actually found increased FA in certain areas in people with ADHD. Oh, okay. So it's complex.
Very complex. And the review also mentioned research focusing specifically on those frontostriatothalamic circuits networks, heavily involved in executive functions, reward, and impulse control. Alterations have been reported there too, in both kids and adults with ADHD.
Right. So the big question, I guess, does this cause ADHD? Are these brain differences the reason for the symptoms?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The researchers are pretty careful about that. They emphasize that these brain alterations aren't necessarily a direct cause of the symptoms.
Okay, so what are they then?
There could be co-occurring features. Maybe they develop alongside the symptoms, or perhaps they're even partly a consequence of living with ADHD behaviors over time. The review points out that it's likely a complex interplay between genetics and environment.
Nature and nurture both playing a role.
Exactly. They mentioned genetic factors related to myelin development, for instance, but also how environmental factors can influence these brain pathways too. So it's not a simple A causes B situation. These brain differences are probably one part of a much bigger, more intricate puzzle.
Okay. Wow. So bringing this all together then, we've talked about the emotional side, the time perception issues, those incredibly powerful analogies from lived experience, and now these structural findings about white matter differences, especially in pathways like the corpus callosum. What are the main things you think we should take away from this deep dive?
For me, I think the biggest thing is seeing how interconnected it all is. The emotional piece, the time issues, the focus challenges, the underlying neurology, they're not separate silos. They clearly influence each other in complex
That's
ways.
not the whole system.
It really seems to be.
Yeah.
And secondly, the sheer power of those analogies from the Reddit community, they just offer such a profound human understanding that complements the clinical research beautifully.
Couldn't agree more.
And finally, the consistency of the findings around white matter differences, particularly in those major communication tracts like the corpus callosum, it suggests there really are measurable physical differences in brain structure and connectivity that likely contribute to the experience of ADHD.
And for you, our listener, what's the core message here? Why is understanding all this important?
Well, hopefully for you listening, understanding these different facets, the emotional, the cognitive, the neurological, can bring a real sense of validation.
Yeah.
It helps appreciate that the challenges associated with ADHD are very real, and they often stem from these underlying neurological differences. It's not just about not trying hard enough or lacking willpower. There's biology involved.
Absolutely. It helps shift from blame to understanding, maybe.
Exactly. It provides a framework for understanding these unique ways of experiencing the world.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe a final thought for you to chew on. Knowing about this neurological basis, knowing about the huge diversity in how ADHD shows up, as we saw in those analogies, how might we as a society evolve our understanding? How can our support systems better accommodate these differences? And maybe even more importantly, how can we better recognize and foster the unique strengths that often go along with this kind of neurodiversity?
That's a great question to leave people with. There's definitely more to explore, and the research is ongoing. We'd certainly encourage you to look more into the sources we discussed if this sparked your interest. Keep asking questions, keep learning.